You're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled When Humans Unleashed a Zombie Apocalypse on an Alien Planet. Best stories. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now, we begin. The first scream never reached orbit. From the bridge of the expedition carrier Arcadia, Commander Mara Ilian watched the planet Vranes rotate beneath a veil of glacial clouds, its valleys braided with silver rivers and luminous jungles. She had come to this world with a promise in her throat and a gun in her hand. Evacuate survivors, disable the hegemony's refinery grid, and leave before the occupying Kith raiders returned. It was supposed to be a clean cut, a thing with sharp edges, a rescue carved out of chaos. The scream from the surface, lancing up through a broken convoy and dying in static, shattered that certainty with something rawer than fear. "Replay," Mara said, her voice low, as if speaking too loudly might fracture the thin calm of the bridge. The sound came again. A breathless cry, then a gurgling chorus behind it, then a thud, mic cut or body falling. The audio tech swallowed, nodded, and let silence claim the room. Dr. Sana Bukhari, chief biologist, stood with arms folded, her eyes haunted by sleeplessness. That signal originated near Site 12, the Hrodek camps. She glanced toward the tactical display where a cluster of blue triangles marked human relief teams, and a wider ring of green represented Hrodek refugees, spindled, four-armed natives whose amber eyes looked like stained glass in the light. Mara had promised them safety. She had promised everyone safety. Site 12 was clear 12 hours ago, said Sergeant Cole Abram, a heavy-shouldered veteran whose voice carried scuffs of old battles. Something changed, fast. Something had changed because of them. The Arcadia carried more than food and med tents. It carried the unspoken weight of the war. Havoc 9, a gene-strand weapon calibrated to the biochemistry of the Kith raiders. A viral wolf that hunted only off-worlders, designed to spare the Hrodek and the human relief teams. Havoc 9 had not been made to be used. It had been made to be feared. But the Kith were returning with a fleet, and fear alone had never saved anyone. "We're not using it," Mara had told Sana the night before, a vow wrapped in sleep deprivation and coffee steam. "We're getting everyone out." Now the scream replayed again in Mara's skull, and the promise felt like a fragile cup clutched too tightly in cold hands. Cole touched the rail of the star map. "Commander, I can have a team on the ground in 8 minutes." Mara nodded. "Take Theta Squad, eyes only, no heroics." She looked at Sana, who had gone very still as if listening to some internal tremor. "You too, I need your judgment." Sana didn't hesitate. "I'll prep." They dropped in a sleet of ion fire, a shuttle diving through Vranes' low cloud layer and into a canyon that opened like the mouth of a world. Metallic trees gleamed along the ridges, their leaves thin as razors and alive with bioluminescence. Far below, rivers stitched the jungle with quicksilver. The Hrodek had lived here long before the Kith arrived with drills and guns. They had carved homes into the canyon walls, like wind and water had taught them the shapes of refuge. The shuttle banked toward Site 12, a cluster of prefabricated habitats arranged around a med dome. As they descended, the silence grew heavy. No patrol drones, no chatter, no glassmaker birds whirring at the edge of sound. The jungle held its breath. "Thermals?" Cole asked. "Too many," the pilot murmured, confusion in his voice. "Everywhere moving." They touched down in a hail of dust. The bay doors opened and air swaggered in wet green, sharp with ozone. Cole led the team out, rifles low, visors down. Sana followed, helmet tight to her jaw, breath fogging the inside of her visor even though the suit scrubbers hissed in their regular rhythm. Mara stayed on the shuttle ramp, one foot on Vranes, one on steel, the axis of decision. The first thing she smelled was sweet rot. It wasn't the stink of decay after days. It was fresher than that, like bruised fruit cut with copper. It made her think of hands slick with blood under a dawn sky and of funeral flowers crushed in a fist. She pushed the thought down and moved forward. They found the first bodies near the med dome. Hrodek lay sprawled in a tangle, a mother and two young. Their copper skin turned ashy, their forearms folded in unnatural angles. Their eyes were wrong. The irises, usually jeweled amber, were filmed over with a pale glaze that veined into the whites. Around their mouths, a froth of glassy threads bright as spun sugar glittered and then stilled. Sana knelt beside them. "Don't touch," she said, voice small and full of something that had no room left for fear. She extended a wand, the sensor chirping as it sampled air and surface. "It's not Kith munitions." Cole scanned the horizon. "Then what is it?" Sana's visor cast a ghost of her face on the glass. "A bloom." She said it like a prayer and a curse. Mara felt the planet tilt. "A bloom," Cole repeated. "I thought those were old," Sana finished. "Extinct or sleeping." She looked up, eyes meeting Mara's through two panes of glass in a lifetime. "When the Hrodek told us stories about the Grey Choir, I thought they were talking about a metaphor, a memory of a plague turned into myth. But if this is real, on the edge of camp something moved. It shambled out of the trees with a gait that suggested a remembered shape rather than a learned one. A Hrodek male, thin as hunger, glass thread froth clinging to his lips, eyes glazed white. He did not breathe, he did not bleed, he was not alive in the way the word meant yesterday. He made a sound that was not a voice, and from the trees behind him came more. "Back," Cole snapped. They didn't fire. They were professional enough to know that fear makes noise louder than bullets. They retreated in a practiced sweep, covering angles, moving toward the shuttle where the air filters might buy them time. The Hrodek know the things that had been Hrodek followed, slow at first, then faster, moving with a ragged collective motion like wind pushing reeds. Their hands curled, their mouths worked, their eyes never blinked. Sana's wand chimed, numbers scrolled. "It's not bacterial," she said, mind sprinting, voice trying to keep up. "Not fungal as we know it. It's multivalent, an old planetary defense mechanism or a predator. A viral fungal hybrid, no, it's too complex for that word. Think of it like a choir, layers of different organisms singing the same song." "Zombies," one of the soldiers breathed. Sana flinched. "If you want to be unscientific, yes." "Unscientific works under fire," Cole said flatly. They reached the shuttle ramp. Mara backed in last, rifle steady, though her heart thudded against her ribs like it wanted out. The creatures advanced. One tripped on the bodies they'd passed, fell, writhed, and then staggered up again with threads gleaming across its face like a net. "Seal," Mara ordered. The ramp lifted. The screams came at last, muffled by steel. The pilot threw power to the engines and the shuttle rose on pillars of blue. "Get us to Arcadia," Mara said. Now. They didn't go to Arcadia. They went to the nearest Hrodek enclave carved into the canyon wall. A city of galleries and halls that curled inside stone like a nautilus. It was called Keithel, the shell of refuge. As they approached, the outer platforms filled with moving figures. Not a mob, not yet. Lines of Hrodek, eyes clear, held back their infected relatives with spears and lines of heated wire. Children huddled in alcoves, silent as nuts. The air smelled of minerals and smoke, and somewhere, under everything, that sweet rot. Mara stepped out onto the platform with Cole and Sana beside her. The Hrodek leader, Kethran of the Shell, met them. He was tall even for his kind, with a crown of silver bone ridges that marked age and honor. His eyes met Mara's without flinching. "You heard it, Wake," he said, voice like polished stone. "You felt the Grey Choir." "We saw it," Mara said. "We're here to help." Keth's gaze flicked to the infected below, to the jungle bristling with light. "When our ancestors made the first cities, the planet made a song to keep the old predators at bay. It was not meant for us. It was meant for the ones who came before. When invaders crushed us, some asked if we should wake the choir again. We told them no, we do not unleash a thing that does not sleep." Mara didn't miss the implication, a warning against reflexive violence, an indictment wrapped in a parable. "We didn't wake it," she said, "but we might have nudged it." Sana looked at her sharply. Mara felt the heaviness of the Havoc 9 canisters in Arcadia's vault like a secret leaking through stone. "We brought a defense against the Kith Raiders," she said, "a targeted agent, designed not to touch Hrodic biology." She glanced at Sana, whose silence felt like permission. If our presence here changed balances, if our prepared defense resonated with this choir, then we are responsible. Responsibility. The word tasted like iron. Keth's eyes narrowed. He did not step back. He did not draw a weapon. He folded two of his hands into the other two and bowed his head the width of a breath. "Then help." Sana's voice came steadier now that the shape of the enemy had a name. The gray choir propagates by whispering between cells. It rides the signals that tell bodies when to heal and when to grow. It is not mindless. It's a program written in chorus, adjusting to new songs. Havoc 9 was a loud song. The choir woke to echo it. Cole looked down at the infected swarming along the lower ramps, at Hrodic spearmen pushing them back with electricity and fire. "How do we shut a choir up?" Sana lifted her chin. "We answer it with a better song." They built a lab in a stone gallery while the city braced itself with old tools. The Hrodic had always been builders, and their hands, so deft with metal and stone, turned to filters and heaters and sealants. The Arcadia sent down clean air processors and portable med domes, and human engineers stitched them into Hrodic veins. Fighters took turns at the outer barricades, sparking with electrical lines that shocked back the infected without spraying blood that might carry the choir. The infected did not climb like animals. They moved like a tide, surging against obstacles, seeking entry, their glazed eyes reflecting pale ghost lights. Mara coordinated sleep, which meant she did not sleep. She walked the galleries, speaking to terrified children in a voice so calm that she believed it while it lasted. She monitored patrols, juggled dwindling ammo, dragged generators into place, and listened to old women tell stories about the time before invaders when the stars sang friendly. She kept her rifle clean and her promises cleaner. Cole fought like he breathed. He took shifts at the barricades where sparks made lightning in the canyon night. He trained Hrodic youths who had never lifted more than a shaping hammer to use shock batons and magnets like extensions of their hands. He ate on his feet and laughed in the face of fear until fear slunk away to lick its wounds. Sana lived in the lab, her body moving between benches as if on rails laid in a previous lifetime. She collected samples through sealed hoods, whispering apologies to what had been people. She watched the choir grow in Petri orbs, threads blossoming into crystals, crystals dissolving into mist that condensed into threads again. She sang under her breath, not a song exactly, a rhythm to keep her mind from unraveling. On the second night, a young Hrodic mother battered at the doors with her fists until guards let her in. She carried her child wrapped in silver cloth. The child's eyes were milky. The mother's were clear, filled with something that had learned to live next to terror without seeding it the house. "Please," she said, "if there is a song, sing it now." Sana wanted to say she was close, but truth is the currency of triage and lies bankrupt hope. "Not yet," she said. "I need time." "Time is a crease," the mother said softly. "It folds. You think you have more until you don't." Sana took the child's pulse through the cloth with gloved fingers. It stuttered fast and wrong. The choir had rewritten the little one's rhythms, making the tiny body a speaker in its band. Sana swallowed and looked at the mother and said, "Stay. Sit with me. Tell me a story about your people. Talk so I can remember why my hands are shaking." The mother sat. She told a tale about a river that once ran red with minerals and how her grandmother had taught her to polish stones until they were mirrors. Sana listened and extracted a sample of the child's breath into a sealed tube and did not cry, because there would be time for that only in a different life. On the third day, The Kith raiders arrived. Their ship slid out from behind Vranis's broken moon like teeth emerging from a wound. Burn-scarred hulls, bright with tribal glyphs and the hard shine of recycled death. They had come to retrieve their machines and punish the Hrodek for daring to survive. Their scouts ate the comm bands with static. Their capital ship began spooling a strike on Arcadia. Mara stood on the outer platform of Keithel and watched the sky lighten with the promise of fire. She spoke into the ship-to-ground channel, calm as water. "Arcadia, this is ground actual. If the Kith get within range." "Understood," came the reply. Captain Reyes' voice, clipped but steady. "We hold the blind side of the moon. We're charging the drives for a close pass." "Negative," Mara said. "Do not bring them down on the city. Keep them chasing you." A pause, and the choir. Mara looked down at the tide of infected pressing against the lower barricades, at Hrodek defenders sweating behind their shock lines. "The choir is ours to quiet." Keth stepped beside her, motion like stone warmed by sun. "We have old guns," he said, "made when we still thought we could bargain with raiders. They are dust, but we remember where the dust sleeps." "Dig them up," Mara said. "We'll teach the dust to sing again." She sent Cole and half the fighters to the old armory caves. They came back with crates that creaked when opened, coil guns and beam lances packed in oilcloth, ammunition like tiny suns asleep in boxes. Humans and Hrodek cleaned them together, hands moving over metal, making old lines shine. Children carried water and food, and no one had to tell them not to look down over the rails where the infected surged. Sanaa's lab hummed. The choir hated heat, but heat alone drove it deeper into bodies where blood ran too hot to reach. It loved electrical signals, but not in the way cells fed it. It wanted the harmony, not the noise. She built a counter-choir, a shimmer of nanoflakes suspended in solution, each a tiny instrument programmed to bind to the choir's notes and damp them toward silence. 1,000 tiny tuning forks set to hum into chaos. Havoc 9 almost certainly woke it, she told Mara when the commander came to check progress. "It's keyed to Kith biochemistry, but it's loud in ways we didn't predict." The choir listened. It adapted. "My counter-choir is gentler, precise." Mara nodded. "Will it spare the infected if it can?" Sanaa's mouth tightened. "If there's anything left of them that's not choir, yes. If not, it will stop the song. Stopping is mercy when the music hurts." Mara thought about mercy. She thought about the mother with the child wrapped in silver cloth. She thought about the promises she had made, which were not shields but spears, tools that required you to thrust back against the dark. "How fast?" she asked. "I can synthesize enough to saturate the city's air in 6 hours, Sanaa said. "But to clear the canyon, we need the wind." "Then we'll make the wind," Mara said. The Kith strike hit Arcadia before the synth finished. The sky over the canyon lit with threads of fire as the carrier danced between missile arcs. The capital ship's energy lance cut a sheet of atmosphere into steam and missed the city by less than a prayer. In the distance, beyond the mountain ridge, a white blossom rose where the beam struck jungle. For a heartbeat, the gray choir stirred visibly, threads shining in air like frost. The infected surged. The city bent. Mara took the wall where the surge crested. She braced a beam lance on the rail and fired into the tide without thinking of faces. Cole stood beside her with a coil gun that thudded like a giant's heartbeat. Hrodek defenders moved with a choreography born in an hour and smoothed by 1,000 years of artisanship transformed into war. Electricity snapped and hissed. Bodies fell and rose again and fell once more, finally still, not because mercy had arrived, but because physics had. Keth shouted in his own language, a word that meant hold not as command but as promise. The word rippled through the galleries, passed from mouth to mouth like bread. The infected pressed so close that the glass threads at their mouths brushed the rails, leaving a glitter that made light behave in odd ways. A Hrodek boy slipped. Mara grabbed his arm and heaved him behind the line, muscles snarling. Cole took a step forward to cover a gap, and staggered when an infected's hand closed on his sleeve and the glass thread sliced through fabric. He tore free, adrenaline turning his breath into knives. The place where the threads had grazed his skin felt like ice. "Cole," Mara began. "I'm fine," he said, "because sometimes a lie is a splint that holds you until you can reach the real doctor." The Kith capital ship hunched in the sky, turning, bringing its lance to bear for another cut. Arcadia blazed by, dumping decoys and firing every turret it had, a small thing taunting a larger thing into fury. The strike missed again. Maybe it would miss a third time. Maybe hope was not a strategy. Maybe it was the only one anyone had left. Sana staggered out of the lab with a pack on her back and a mask on her face, eyes bright with the kind of light that comes when you stare too long at equations and find yourself looking at a map of your own mind. "It's ready," she said. "The counter-choir, we need air movement, we need the canyon to be a bellows." Mara looked at the vent shafts that pierced the rock, the old Hrodek wind tunnels that once cooled homes in summer and warmed them in winter. "Open them," she said, and Hrodek runners scattered to obey. "Flood the counter-choir through the ducts, every gallery, every room, every whispering place." Keth placed 2 hands on Sana's shoulders. "You have our breath," he said, ancient formal words given new weight. "May it carry your song like a river carries stones." They cut the seals on the ducts. Fans roared alive, ancient and stubborn. Sana's solution vaporized into a fine mist, a near-invisible snow that drifted and curled and caught the light in strange halos. It moved through the city, and then, because physics has a sense of drama, a downdraft off the Kith's mist strike sent a current of air pouring through the canyon. The mist lifted and spread. It touched the infected first at the barricades, then further down along the ramps, then on the distant river where a cluster of figures had begun to wade without understanding water. The change was not a gunshot-loud thing. It was a quiet thing, a softening, a letting go. The infected staggered, not because weapons had broken them, but because something inside them had loosened its grip. Some crumpled and lay still as if sleep had discovered them mid-scream. Some blinked once, oh God, that blink, and then went slack. Some fought the counter-song tooth and thread, thrashing with spidery movements that made children cover their eyes and adults lower their heads. The choir resisted, and the counter-choir hummed, and somewhere between those 2 notes, silence found a foothold. It did not save everyone. Nothing ever does. The child wrapped in silver cloth lay on Sana's bench as monitors whispered. The counter-choir touched her and paused, then hummed louder as if trying to coax a returning. The child's breath evened, slowed, stalled, started again. The mother held Sana's free hand, their gloves touching, the feel of it like standing on the rim of a cliff and not looking down. The Kith capital ship denied its ground strike, changed tactics. It dropped pods. The pods fell like dark fruit, rounded and hard and full of teeth. They slammed into the canyon edge above Keithel and split open to release raiders in exosuits gleaming with quartz armor. They came howling. They did not care about the infected. They did not care about Hrodek lives beyond their usefulness as resources. They saw the humans on the wall and set their guns to tear them down. Mara put her rifle to her shoulder and fired until her magazine clicked empty. Cole swapped her a fresh one without looking. Keth's people met the raiders with beam lances and axes that had shaped stone, now shaping armor. The raiders laughed through their helmets, an ugly sound that isn't joy but wants to be. Arcadia dove. It fell into the canyon with a roar that made stone vibrate and glass threads quiver. Her hull scorched from near misses, her guns ragged but fierce. Arcadia opened every port and let loose a river of drones that swooped like a black flock. They didn't fire to kill. They fired to cut lines, to blind sensors, to break exosuits at the joints. They didn't sing. Their engines screamed. Ground actual. Captain Reyes' voice came through like a lifeline. "We can't hold this altitude. You have 2 minutes of cover." "Enough," Mara said. Sanaa's counter-choir poured out of the vents in shimmering ghosts. The mist-coated raider armor crept into seams hummed against Kith biochemistry. For a breath, nothing happened. Then the exosuit's neural interfaces hiccuped as the choir's echo in the raiders' bodies made their feedback loops go strange. The Kith stumbled, their practiced devastation broken by static in their own heads. Hrodik lances bit. Human rounds found the thin places under armor plates, 2 minutes extended like grace. Cole took a hit to the shoulder that spun him around. He landed hard, came up harder, axe in hand, and took a raider at the knee. The blow rang through his bones. He snarled and saw, as if lit by lightning, the place where the glass threads had nicked his arm. It had turned pale, a frost flower etched in skin. He ignored it, he moved. Mara found herself face to face with a raider larger than a nightmare. The exosuit's faceplate showed her reflection, a woman with ash on her cheek, eyes bright as a promise, hair matted with dust. The raider lifted a blade, Mara lifted hers. When metal met metal, sparks made brief stars. The raider pressed, exosuit whirring. Mara let the momentum carry his blade up and aside and stepped in. Her knee crushed a joint. She fired point blank into the seam at the armpit. The shot thundered. The raider fell with a sound like a felled tree. She didn't watch him land. She turned to the next. In the lab, the child's breath steadied. Sanaa checked monitors she'd already checked and then made herself stop checking so she could stand because the humming of the counter-choir was showing new harmonics in her simulations. "It's learning," she whispered. "It's finding a second voice." She keyed commands. Nanoflakes adjusted. She watched the models align, the mist outside shimmering in a color that wasn't visible but felt like it was. Keth fought with an artist's grace. He was not a soldier, not in the way Cole was, but his body knew lines and balances, and he applied that knowledge to the bodies of raiders with deadly intimacy. He broke one's arm with emotion like snapping a rod of glass. He took another's blade and turned it into a curve that would never cut again. He bled and did not know it because he had already given his blood to his city 1,000 times in the past as sweat. The tide turned not with a trumpet, but with a sigh. It was the sound of the raiders realizing their exosuits were no longer the loudest song in their bodies. It was the sound of the infected going still by the hundreds as the counter-choir found the last notes it needed. It was the sound of Arcadia clawing altitude on engines that whined like wolves. The last raider who could still run ran. Mara let him go. Victory is not a thing you chase down with a knife. It's the moment you stop needing to chase anything at all. Silence fell, but not absolute. Somewhere a child cried. Somewhere a generator coughed. Somewhere Sanaa laughed once, sharp and relieving, and then cried because laughing alone in a lab is unhealthy, and she was tired of pretending her hands didn't shake. The infected bodies lay like fallen sleepwalkers along the ramps. Hrodik moved among them with reverent, wary steps. Some were beyond any return that medicine could name. Some blinked and looked up, eyes clearing from the inside out like frost melting from a window. A man whispered his mother's name in a voice that had forgotten itself and now found itself again. In the lab, the child in silver cloth opened her eyes, amber, not glazed, and the mother made a sound that could have shattered a jewel with its joy. Mara stood on the platform, took off her helmet, and let the wind find her face. It smelled like rain and smoke and the ghost of sweet rot at the edge of memory. She breathed it as if the air were a letter addressed to her by someone who had once loved her and had forgiven her for everything that came between. Cole leaned against the rail because if he didn't lean, he might fall asleep standing. He looked at the frost flower scar on his arm and finally admitted to himself that it wasn't just a scratch. Sanaa saw him see it. She crossed to him and traced the edges with a gloved finger. "It's in you," she said. He didn't flinch. "Is it singing loud?" "Not anymore," she said. "The counter-choir is a blanket over its mouth, but we'll keep listening." He nodded. I've always been tone deaf. Don't get cocky, she said, not smiling because the muscles for that were sore, but her eyes softened. We aren't out of it yet. Above, the Kith capital ship angled away at last, pulling its remaining pods back into its belly. It limped. Arcadia, refusing to pretend she could pursue, drifted to a higher orbit like a tired hawk. The Kith would be back with more ships, new strategies. They were a people who never forgot a debt or an insult. That was the world. You quiet one song and another rises. That's why people learn to harmonize. Work began the way it always does after war, quietly with hands. Horde carried their sleeping and their dead. Humans repaired the city's wind tunnels and filters. Sana tuned her counter-choir to a lower volume to maintain a steady hum in the ducts. Keth oversaw funerals that were not like human funerals but were tender in ways that translated across stars. Cole slept for 3 hours and woke ready to help dig out the collapsed stairwell, where some of the infected had fallen and then been stilled. Mara wrote a report to no one describing what responsibility felt like in her bones. They could have left. The mission had been to evacuate, to cut refinery lines, to go. Arcadia could carry 10,000 if they packed them like people into a lifeboat and not cargo into a hold. They could have abandoned Keithel to the Kith and to the choir's memory, taken as many as they could and called it survival. Mara stood in the council hall, stone warm from bodies and lamps. Keth was there. Sana and Cole were there. The young mother with the silver cloth was there, her child asleep now in her arms without glass threads at her mouth. Mara spoke plainly. We can lift you out, she said. We can run. Keth looked at his hands, older perhaps than they had been this morning. We could run, he agreed. We have run many times, our legs know the way. He looked up. But this is our home. Sana, who had grown up on a station that had never known sky and had fallen in love with planets through textbooks, said, The choir can protect you if we tune it right. It was born here for a reason. It was misused by accident and neglect. If we stay, we can help teach it the new song it needs. Cole rubbed the frost scar absently. The Kith will come back with a better knife, he said. They always do. He shrugged. So we keep making better shields and maybe sharper knives if we have to. Mara looked at them, at the weight and the hope and the stubbornness that made them human. She looked at Keth, whose eyes held grief and pride like two halves of a coin. We stay, she said. You would? Keth asked, startled enough to let a crack show in stone. Mara nodded. We brought the loud song that woke your choir. We owe you a better one. We'll help you tune the city's breath, rebuild the defenses, teach the choir to sing to raiders and not to you. You'll paint your names on our walls, Keth said, not as accusation but as prophecy. And we will carve yours on our hearts. They stayed. Sana worked with a cadre of Hrodek apprentices, teaching them to read protein folds as if they were poetry and to listen to spectra as if they were rain. They learned fast. The choir, treated as a tool instead of a god or a monster, responded like an old machine carefully coaxed into service. It whirred, sputtered, complained, and then did what it was asked, more or less if asked politely. Cole trained a militia that wouldn't have called itself that a week ago. He taught ambush in curves of rock. He showed how to set a trip line invisible at dusk and how to find water where rock sweats. He told jokes that weren't very good in any language and made kids laugh anyway. Mara turned Arcadia into a shadow over the canyon, a deterrent you could point to from below and say, that one there loves us. She negotiated with other human ships for supplies. She sent messages into the dark to allies who might come and enemies who would. She slept sometimes and dreamed of sound. The choir when it was hungry and the counter-choir when it was kind, and a human voice saying her name from years ago when the war had just begun. The Kith came back with a fleet. It happened at dusk on a day that had been good in all the ways days can be good after disaster. Bread was baked. A child took a first step. A broken pump breathed again. The fleet uncurled out of hyperspace like the hand of a dead god. Arcadia moved instantly, but she was one ship. The Kith had many. They darkened the sky with their intentions. Mara had expected this. Planning isn't prophecy, but it can feel like it when the pieces fit. She stood on the platform with Keth and Sana and Cole, wind stinging her face. Positions, she said, and the word unspooled 1,000 smaller words that turned into motion. Sana keyed the choir up. The ducks sighed. The mist flowed. The tuned drone became a hum you could feel in your chest, a bass note under everything that made the hairs on your arms lift. Hrodek sealed doors and opened tunnels in a sequence that turned the city's breath into a windstorm in miniature. Drones lifted from Arcadia like a flock startled from a tree. The militia, and they used the word now, proud, took their lines. The Kith fired first, a volley meant to pulverize. Arcadia turned it into sparks with a trick she had taught herself when nobody was watching. The fleet adjusted as they do. Pods fell. The choir rose to meet them, not with death, but with a careful confusion. The Kith stumbled as their suit interfaces filled with harmonics that told their muscles different stories than their brains believed. The choir had learned not to touch Hrodek. It had learned that humans were friends even when they bled. It had learned to bite only the mouths that ate worlds. They fought for hours. It felt like days because fear stretches time and courage ties it back down in knots. Cole took his place on the ridge, his scar a pale star on his arm, and hacked a path through 3 raiders who had decided he was the reason knives existed. Sana sat in the lab with a hand on a console and the other on her chest, as if she could calm her own heart by demonstrating how. Keth drew raiders into tight spaces where their exosuits made them clumsy, then showed them how stone remembers every hand that has ever touched it by catching their feet and not letting go. Mara ran where the line bowed, where the wall bent, where the map stuttered. Her voice never rose. It filled the radio with the cadence of a drum that knows the beat is all that keeps feet moving. At a hinge of the battle, when everything could still pitch toward loss, a Kith breacher team blew the east vent. The choir's pressure dropped. The harmonics wavered. The tide surged. For a sliver of a minute, it looked like all their work would come apart like a net cut free of its knots. Mara sprinted. She didn't think. Thinking is a luxury you earn by surviving. She dove into the vent shaft and slid like she had as a child on metal slides that burned legs in summer. The breach gaped like a wound, and raiders poured through it. She slammed a pack into the hole. A portable fan the size of a backpack hit the seal, and the fan screamed to life, pouring mist back through the breach in a jet that made the air shake. Raiders stumbled. The choir found its voice again and sang directly into their suits with such precision that their weapons thought they were hands and dropped themselves. Cole arrived then, bleeding from a dozen bright places that all lied and said they didn't hurt. He threw himself at the last 2 raiders in the breach. It was messy in ways that don't bear poetry. It ended with quiet and with Mara realizing she had tears on her face that had nothing to do with grief. The fleet broke. The Kith don't retreat because they are afraid. They retreat because math tells them their death-to-prize ratio has gone sour. Their nav lights flared. Their ships wheeled, gathered the living, and left the dead. Arcadia didn't pursue. She sent a message on open bands. A simple thing in clear words. This world fights back. Find easier prey. Later, when the sky returned to stars and the wind came honest again through the vents, Mara walked the galleries and saw faces she knew now. She saw the child who had opened her eyes. She saw the mother who had taught her the word for patience in Hrodek. She saw Cole asleep on his feet and Sana weeping into her hands and Keth carving a mark into the stone of Keithel that would shine for generations when light hit it just so. They had unleashed a zombie apocalypse on an alien planet. That was the headline that would fit on a screen. But the story, real and long and ugly and beautiful, was about what came after. Accepting fault, learning a new language of survival, teaching a world to sing protection and not fear, building a home out of the ruins of a mistake. Weeks became months. Seasons on Vrannies are strange, measured in winds and glow. They charted them, left notes for the next generation in a shorthand that a scientist could love and a farmer could use. The choir settled into its role like a gatekeeper who feeds stray cats on their rounds. The kith returned twice with fresh tricks and left twice with fresh grief. The Hrodic militia became the Hrodic Guard, and their uniforms were as elegant as their tools. Arcadia moved on to escort convoys and returned when the sky looked wrong. On an evening when the canyon lit with bioluminescent blossoms and the river whispered plans to rocks, Mara stood with Keth on the highest balcony. Sana leaned on the rail, exhaustion held at bay by stubbornness, and Cole balanced an apple on his knuckles because he never stopped fidgeting unless asleep. Below, the city breathed like a chest. "Your people are curious," Keth said. "You break and you fix, you promise and you pay. You bring loud songs and you leave softer ones." He tilted his head. "Why?" Mara considered, then let the words come without varnish. "Because we can't stand to leave a thing worse than we found it," she said. "Because we have done that before and it tasted like ash for years. Because we told ourselves once we were conquerors and didn't like who we were in those mirrors." She looked down at the city, at the scars and the repairs that ran like stitches over stone. "Because endurance is the only victory that lasts." Keth nodded as if she had passed an exam he hadn't told her she was taking. "We will write your names," he said, "not as saviors, as neighbors." Sana smiled, though tears still lived uninsured in her eyes. "Neighbors is better." Cole tossed the apple. It carved an arc through light and came back to his hand. He grinned. "Neighbors watch each other's doors." "Neighbors share tools," Sana said. "Neighbors bring bread," Mara added, and the three of them laughed, not because it was funny, but because laughter sometimes is a way of telling the universe you intend to remain. Down in the galleries, the young mother with the child waved up at them. The child waved back with both right arms because that's what she had, and that was another kind of beauty. The stars turned. The planet breathed. The choir hummed not like a funeral but like a lullaby. On a night when raids were only a memory and the wind carried the scent of metal leaves, a human commander, a scientist, a soldier, and an alien artisan stood together and understood that home can be a promise you keep in a place that once tried to kill you. And that day, the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.